After little adjustments, our model is ready for rigging. I'm gonna start creating 3 neck controls and 1 head control. I'm gonna go to my side view. I'm going to rigging, skeleton, create joints. I'm gonna do 1 joint in the root of my neck. If you don't see the joints, it's because you need to go to shading, X-ray joints, and now you can see the joints even if the mesh is there. So I'm gonna do 1 joint in the root of the neck, 1 at the middle, probably somewhere here, 1 at the end of the neck, and 1 somewhere here for the head joint. If you want to have your joint centered to this mesh, there's one trick that you can do. If you select, for example, at this moment, I don't know if my joint is actually in the center of the mesh, and that's what I want. So a good technique is to select the loop or the vertexes you want, and if you click translate, you can see where is the center. So my center is here. My joint is not actually in the center. So I'm gonna create what is a cluster. I'm going to deform and cluster. Cluster is a deformer that moves the vertexes you select, but you are only to use that as reference to do a match translation. So you can select your joint, then the cluster, you go to modify, and match translation. That way, your joint is exactly on the same position than your cluster, and then you can just delete the cluster. I'm gonna do the same for this one. I'm gonna do a cluster here. I'm gonna do a cluster here. And for the head, no, I don't really want it for the head. So I'm just going to do a match translation to the cluster. Modify, match translation. No, sorry, just match translation. We don't want to do a match all transforms because we don't want the rotation. We just want that translation. And same for this one. I would probably have this one loop lower. So I'm gonna do it probably here. So I'm gonna create deform cluster and I'm gonna snap it there. So this is, you don't need to do this. This is just like a technique to be able to have your joints centered to the mesh. But I use this a lot. So probably here is my end joint, and then for my head joint, I want this to be somewhere here. And then we need to delete these ones because we don't want these deformers here. So just delete. And now these are my joints for the neck. I'm gonna rename them. And now I'm gonna create controls. Let's go to create nerves circle. We're going to use nerve circles for controls. So I will scale it, and I want this to match my joint position. So I'm going to modify, match, translation. I want to have my custom rotation. I want to have Y as my up axis, Z as my forward axis, and X as my sides. So I'm gonna customize this rotation, something like that. But if you see, I don't want any values here. I want my translate and rotations to be 0 and my scales to be 1. But the problem is that if I do a freeze transformations, I'm gonna lose my orientation on the control. So I don't want that. I want to have these values, but I want to have this orientation on my control. So for that, I'm gonna click Ctrl C, and I'm gonna do a group above my control. This is my control. I'm gonna call it root neck control, and I'm gonna do a group. So this group is going to have the same name, but it's going to have a suffix called offset. And now I'm gonna do the same. I'm gonna match my translation, and now I can scale this one, but right click, control vertex. That way I don't modify my scale attributes. And I'm gonna rotate now my control, but not with this one. I'm not going to select my control. I'm going to select my group. I'm going to want probably a 22 degrees rotation. That works fine, I think. And if you see, I have these values on my group, but my control is clean. It has 0 values on translate and rotations and 1 on scales, and that's what I want. We want these values so animators can go back to the neutral position at any time. It will be very hard for animators to memorize the exact values for each control, so that's why we always want a value of 0 on the translate and rotations and 1 on the scales. So for my next control, I'm going to click Ctrl D to duplicate, and I'm going to do the same. Match translation, and let's see which rotation I want. This orientation is fine. I'm gonna keep the same orientation for the 3 controls of my neck. And I'm going to rename this as, I'm gonna probably change these names to neck control 1, 2, and 3. So that way it's easier for animators to select them. There it is. And I am going to parent. So I just click my offset, my control, and then I click P. I select my offset of the second control, I select the first control and P. And now this is a hierarchy. So this is the father of all the controls, then is the second one, and the third one. And now I am just going to make better shapes on these ones. Something like that, probably. And now this one is okay. Yeah. If you want to change the color of your control, you go to your attribute editor, then you click Object Displays, Drawing Overrides, Enable Overrides, and you can change the color here. I will select a yellow one for this. And now I am going to create the head control, so I will just duplicate the last neck control. I will match the translation of my head joint. And for this one, I want a different orientation. For the head, I don't actually want this orientation. I want my orientation to be with a world. So as I remember, my orientation of the neck is 22 degrees. So I'm gonna do a minus 22 degrees on the x-axis, and now I have the world position that I want. And I'm gonna rename this to head control. I want this orientation, but I want to change the shape of my control, so I will do something like that. And finally, I am going to parent my head control to the last neck control with P. Once we created the controls and the joints, we want the controls to drive the joints. So I am going to do this by hierarchy. I am just going to parent each joint on each control. I select the joint, then the control, and I click P. Now let's have some deformation on our model. I will bind all these joints to my geometry. So I select all the joints, then the geometry, skin, bind skin options, and this is the options I am going to use. I am going to click Apply. If we see, in the history of our geometry, we have a skin cluster. A Maya skin cluster is a skinning node that serves as a deformer for binding geometry to joints. So each vertex on the geometry is affected by a number of joints. If I move my controls, we will see that we have a default skinning on our geometry, but this is not ideal. So let's do the skinning from scratch. The first thing I am going to do is to hide all the geometries I don't want, selecting them and clicking Ctrl H. So I can focus just on this mesh. I will click the geometry, skin, paint skin weights to be able to modify the skinning, and I will assign all the skinning to the first joint. So the next 0,1 joint, I will click Add a value of 1. So now all the other joints doesn't have any influences on it. If you try them, you will see that. So all the influence is on the first joint. Now what I want to do is to have this loop with the value of 0.5 in the second joint, and then everything above it, I want it to be controlled by this one. So I will select all the head vertices, but I don't want to select that joint, so I will click here to be able to select the vertices and not the joints. This way, I cannot select the joints. So I will select this loop, this one, and I want all these loops to be influenced by this one. This is the second joint, but I don't want to have one influence on everything. So I just want to have a 0.5 on this loop. And then I will deselect this loop and I will add another 0.5 on it. That is not an issue. I will just add it with a brush manually. And now if you see, we have a deformation here. So I will do the same for this one. I want to select the next loop, that is this one, and everything above it. And I will add a 0.5 influence on this loop and a 1 influences on the other ones. And probably the same for the head. I will just add on the head 0.5 and 1. But I actually want all my chin to be with a head. So I will just add more weights there. And this is what we have. I want to have softer deformations, so we are going to smooth a little bit the weights. If you see, if I make this movement, I want a softer silhouette here. So I will go back to my paint skin weights. I will click the neck number 1 joint, and I will probably select these 2 loops. Or I will grow my selection. And I will do a smooth here. 2 smooths is enough, I think. I don't want these weights here, so I will just remove them with the add tool in -1. And neither in the neck tree. And we have smoother weights here now. If I move this one is a lot softer. I still want to smooth this one a little more. And if I don't want to affect the head joint or the neck 03 joint, I can click here to lock the weights. That means that if I modify all this weight, the modifications are only going to be on this one and this one, because these ones are locked. That means that they cannot be modified. So I'm gonna smooth this area with smooth, or clicking shift. A little bit more, something like that. I will click smooth again. And I can go back to my natural position because my controls has 0 values. This is a lot better. And I'm going to do the same for this one. Probably, let's see how the deformation is. Yes, I want smooth transition here. So now I don't want to modify my neck 01 joint because it is correct. I will just want to modify this one and this one. So I will smooth my weights here. You can only focus on one side because we're going to do a mirror for the skinning. So I'm just focusing on the left side of my model. This is a lot better. Now let's check the head. For the head, I want a softer transition here too. So I will modify the weights there. For the head, I'm just going to modify between my neck 03 joint and the head joint. So I will lock the other ones. And I will smooth a little bit the head joint. Remember that if I remove some influence from my head joint, it is going to be assigned to the neck 03 joint because it is not locked. So if I remove some weights from one joint, they are going to be assigned to another joint automatically. I am going to remove some influence here with my smooth tool, and they will be assigned to the next 03. Also, if I add some influence to my head joint, they are going to be removed from the next 03, because they are the ones that are not locked. I think that's good enough. Now I am going to mirror my skin. I will click Skin, Mirror Skin Weights, and I'm going to use the default settings. I will use positive to negative because this is my positive side and this is my negative side. If I move my control, I can see in the values this is the positive side, this is the negative side. So let's use these options. Apply. So we have smooth transitions here. This is what we want. Now I will unhide the meshes that I was hiding with Shift H, and I will assign all these geometries to my head joint. I select my head joint. I will select now all my geometries, skin, bind skin. Okay, I can see one issue there. That's not a problem. I will select those vertices and assign them to the head. Now let's add a control for our jaw. We could add this control with the next setup, but I'm doing this right now just to show how to add controls to a current rig. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the side view, rigging, skeleton, create joints, and I will create 2 joints. So for these joints, I'm going to choose a pivot that I want for the jaw. This is not an anatomically correct model, this is cartoony style, so it's not necessary to have the pivot on the exact anatomically correct position because in a lot of models like this one is going to look a little bit weird, especially this one that has like a very long jaw and a very long head. So that's why we can break the anatomy rules a little bit with cartoony models. So actually the ideal position for this one would be something like from here. Because if I add a joint here, the mouse is going to get in very fast. So usually this is like the correct position for all the models, but this specific model has a weird shape. So what I actually am gonna do is to have some translate on Y on this one. So I will neutralize my rotations for this model just to have the orientation with the world. I will just go to my attribute editor and reset my joint orient values. The same for the tip, just to be a little bit cleaner. And I will go to my channel box and I will snap this one to the lips. Now let's add this joint to our current skin. So I will select my joint, then my geometry, skin, edit influences, add influences, but I'm gonna click the box just to see the options. Let's be sure that we have this option on lock weights. That means that it will respect all the influences that we already have on our rig. So when we add this joint, the influence will be 0. You will see, if I go to my skin options, everything is as it was before. And this one is on 0. So that's what we want, because if we uncheck this one and we add, it will assign automatically some random weights to this one and we will lose some of the work we've done in the past. And now let's get skinning. The first thing I'm gonna do is to lock all the joints except for the head control, because I don't want to modify any of these joints. I will remove some weight of the head and give that weight to the jaw. So I will click these two, right click, lock invert selection, so the other weights are locked and they can't be modified now. So everything I remove from here is going to be added to the jaw. First thing I'm gonna do is to select the vertex I want to be on the jaw. I will grow my selection. I will select those vertices, maybe also the chin. Probably this one too. I will activate my symmetrical tool to select the other side. I just want these vertices to be affected by the jaw. I will go to my skin tool and I will add those weights to my jaw. If you see, it removed them from the head. And I can check this. Okay, perfect. So my actually movement will be something like this, probably something like that. That will be my result movement of the joint when I set up my user interface. But we need a clear transition here because this is especially if you go to our normal view. This looks awful. So I will try to smooth that a little bit. I will start with this area. So I will go to my skin. So I will go to my skin tool. I will probably remove all this weight from the head and give this weight to the jaw to have like a better transition here. Gonna smooth a little bit these weights. I'm clicking shift, so this will smooth everything. I probably want some influence here. And a little of movement on my cheeks. So what I actually want is to have a 0.5 influence on the corner of my lips. Let's see which one is that loop. So this is the loop that is on the exact corner. So I want this loop to be influenced 0.5 from the head and 0.5 for the jaw. So I will add actually a 0.5 influence to my head, and this will make my jaw to have a point influence on all that. Of course, I don't want all these values, so I will just remove them. And I will smooth a little bit all this area. So now this loop is exact on the middle of the deformation, if you see. And that's what I want, because I'm gonna smooth everything on this side, considering that this is a 0.5. I want my corner to be in the exact middle of all my deformation. So I will select all these loops except the one in the middle, because I want this one to stay as 0.5. I will probably hide my joints so I can look better. And I will smooth these ones. Probably I'm gonna grow my selection a little bit more. And I want to smooth all those weights, not these ones. But yeah, something like that. And I want this loop to always be 100 with the jaw, and this loop on the top to be 100 with the head. So I don't want to affect those ones neither. So I will just smooth a lot. Something like that probably. And this is a much better transition. If we hide the teeth, we're gonna take a look better to that. So this looks a lot nicer. But I don't actually like how this is deforming. Like, this looks like a completely O shape. I want to maintain a little bit more my corners, so I will modify the skin a little bit more. Because for now, I don't see where is the corner exactly. So I would like to see the corner a little bit more. For that, I'm gonna modify a little bit these ones. I want them to be closer than the corner, so I will add a little bit more influence. I will do a scale of 1.5. That means that every value that is on each vertex is gonna be multiplied by 1.1, so it's gonna grow. And the same for the one in the bottom, for the head. I just want to see that corner, you know? I don't want to see everything over smooth. And after that, I'm gonna just smooth all the other loops, but not these ones, because I already like these ones. So I will smooth all the others. Something like that. And yes, this looks a lot more like a mouth. If you see, you can see the actual corner, and this is not over smooth. I will now do our last cleanup. I will remove all these weird weights from here. I don't want weights on my neck here, so I will just remove them. Neither in this area. And that's it, yes, I think. I'm just gonna do like a smooth probably, and that's it. Then I'm going to skin, mirror skin weights, and now we have the same on both sides. And this is our final result. And this is a lot better. If you want to keep a little bit more this area, you can even add more weights here. So that's up to you. Something like that probably. And maybe I'm gonna just do a little bit more smooth. Yes.